Hey everybody, so there's just something I wanted to touch on and give my opinion about. So far this preseason, there has been very little fighting, especially by preseason standards, so far this year. Each of the last 3 days have only seen one fight league-wide each day. Like, nobody is fighting. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I think that is and why I'm not worried about that as far as affecting things in the regular season fight-wise. Because if you're a fight fan like me, you're probably worried and like, oh God, what is going on? There's been almost no fighting this preseason, except for one day where there was just one particular day there were 8 fights and in one night, and that was the only heavy fight night we've had the entire preseason. After that, we had 2 fights in the whole league the next day, and then the last 3 nights have all only had 1 fight. So, compared to 10 years ago, when in the preseason you were getting a fight rate of more than 1 per game, you were up with easily over 1 fight per game in the preseason, and now we're seeing 1 fight per night league-wide. Well, I'm not surprised by this, and I don't think this is any sort of foreseeing anything into the regular season. It's just the difference in the league now, and that the preseason doesn't really matter that much. So look at it this way: 10 years ago, when there were more than 1 fight per game, as across the league in the preseason, you had enforcers still in the league, like guys who would fight all the time, and you had new players coming in trying to earn jobs through fighting, which doesn't happen anymore. So you would have, let's say you'd have 4 or 5 young guys in camp who were probably tough guys in junior, and they were trying to earn a 4th line job or at least an AHL job with the team by fighting to be the enforcer. So if you had, say, each of those guys ended up playing 3 or 4 preseason games before they got sent back down or sent back to junior or ended up making the team, they'd fight every game that they were in. And pretty much every team would have guys like this. So you'd have, these 4 guys who are fighting every game, or every other game that they were in. So you're guaranteed like 1 or 2 fights a game with these guys in the lineup just from those guys. And you had veteran players still willing to fight in the preseason as well. You had your 4th line, enforcers who didn't want their jobs taken because they had these young guys coming in to take their jobs. So if you were a Brian McGrattan or a Jay Rosehill or Eric Goddard, anyone like that, you needed to fight in the preseason too to show the team like, hey, I still got it. I can still knock guys out. None of these kids are coming to take my job. This is still my job. So that's why there was so much fighting in the preseason. Now, where we're at in the league, the enforcers are gone. The Brian McGrattans, the Eric Goddards, the Jay Rosehills, the Colton Orrs are all gone. There's still plenty of guys willing to fight, though, and we see that throughout the league. Fighting is not gone. There's still like 300 fights every year. But if you're a veteran player at this point, you don't have much of a reason to fight in the preseason because there's so much to lose and nothing to gain. If you get hurt in a fight, then you're going to end up missing time in the regular season, and that's just not worth it because then someone literally might come and take your job. Young players, they don't need to fight as much anymore because they're not going to win a job by fighting because there aren't really enforcer jobs out there. If you come into the preseason and you fight 4 times in 4 games, yeah, that's cool and all, and you're showing the team that you're tough, and that's great, but that's not single-handedly going to win you a job the way that it used to. You still have to be able to play, and if you can't play, it doesn't matter that you fought 4 times, because you're still not going to get a roster spot. So young players don't fight as much because they don't need to because that's not going to win them a job. And veteran players aren't being threatened by these young players fighting all the time. They're not going to lose their job to somebody just for fighting, so they don't fight as much. So you have veteran players fighting less in the preseason and young players fighting less in the preseason because it's not going to win them a job, that in itself, and the games really don't matter. Who wins and loses doesn't matter. It's basically just getting yourself in game shape for the regular season. So once the regular season starts, things I think are going to go back to what's normal and what's normal for the league right now. So again, fighting is down, and it's going to be, and it's never going to go back to the way that it used to be. But it's not gone, and last year, I think in the regular season this year, there are going to be more fights than there were last year. Last year was a very down year. The fight rate dropped down to, I think, 0.23 fights per game, so less than one every 4 games. And there were less than 300 fights for the first time in maybe even, probably as long as they've been keeping track of it. So I actually think that there's going to be more fights this year than there were last year because last year was just such a down year. I think the fight rate goes back to about 0.25, so one every 4 games, maybe a little, maybe 0.26, and I think that you'll be back right around 300 fights this year. So I'm not really worried about the lack of fighting in the preseason because I don't think there's any correlation between what's happening in the preseason and what's happening in the regular season. Once you get to the regular season, games matter. Teammates are still going to protect each other. Any sort of, cheap shot or bad hit is going to be met with a response, or at least by most teams. And the veteran players will start fighting again because the games matter and it's a regular season. The Kyle Cliffords, the Tom Wilsons, the Michael Haleys, those guys, the Matt Martins, those guys will all fight. They're much more inclined to fight in the regular season than they are in the preseason because they have roster spots. They are on the team, and they're not going to get their spot taken probably by any young player coming in to be an enforcer because that doesn't really exist anymore. So they have roster spots. Everyone knows that they're tough. They're veteran players. They've been around the league. They don't need to prove anything to anybody. So why fight in the preseason when no real good can come out of it, and you have so much to lose if you get injured. If you end up popping a shoulder out, breaking a hand, now you're out. You're going to miss the start of the regular season, and you're out of the lineup, and now there is a legitimate chance of someone taking your roster spot. So the risk-reward factor just isn't there for veteran players to fight in the preseason anymore, and that I think is a big reason why we see a lot less fighting in the preseason now than we did 10 years ago, as well as fighting just as a whole, preseason, regular season, playoffs, everything just going down. But I'm not overly worried in the lack of fighting this preseason affecting the regular season. We're going to see pretty normal amounts of fighting for 2018, I think, this regular season, and I think preseason fighting is going to continue to drop. It's never going to completely go away. You're always going to have guys who, in the case of big hits or cheap shots or, goaltenders, protecting goaltenders, there'll always be guys stepping up to fight and protect their teammates. But the fighting for no reason is going to be gone in the preseason. You're not going to see people fight to just because of the score. Like in the regular season, if your team gets down 3-0 in the first period, generally your fourth line goes out there and tries to fight and get something going and get some momentum for your team. They're not going to do that in the preseason because the score doesn't matter. Who cares if you're down 3-0? You're just trying to get in a game shape and get some chemistry going with your teammates. And if you lose the game, you lose the game. It doesn't matter. In the regular season, it does matter. So I'm not overly worried about this, I'm not overly worried about the lack of fighting in this preseason. I expect that to continue, and I expect it to probably get lower and lower until it bottoms out at wherever it's going to bottom out in the near future. And I don't think it's going to have a huge effect on regular season fighting because your reasons to fight go up a lot more in the regular season than in the preseason because the games matter. and everything just kicks up a notch in the regular season compared to these preseason games, which really don't mean much. So that's basically what I've got on that. I just want to talk about a little bit because if you're a fight fan like me, you're probably thinking, like, what is going on? Why is nobody fighting? But it's because the risk reward there isn't there anymore to fight in the preseason, unless you're protecting a teammate, which we've seen quite, a decent amount so far this preseason. So that's what I got on that. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. Check out offthewallhockey.com. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.